We're on Usapang Fil, brought to you by PinoyLife, your lifestyle and knowledge sharing channel. Magandang gabi po. We're streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. Please go ahead, like, share, subscribe to Usapang Fil. Even better, visit our website www.pinoylife.net where you can get more content on video and on podcast mode. Samahan niyo po kami na mapag-usapan naman natin ang issue ng disinformation at ang paglaganap ng fake news sa ating mga social media accounts. Ako po si Godinez. I'm a U.S. immigration attorney and immigrant rights advocate. And with me tonight is my co-host, Noel Pangilinan. Noel?
Magandang gabi po. Kumusta po kayo? Ako po si Noel Pangilinan. Welcome to tonight's episode of Usapang Fil. I teach Filipino and I teach Philippine history and literature. Chris?
Okay, so we'll get right to it. One of the major problems that the Filipino-American community is grappling with today is the increased incidence of anti-Asian attacks. At this point, we'd like to bring in a survivor of anti-Asian attack, Potri Ranka Maniskianyo Nur, also known as Potri Manka Manis. She's a registered nurse and a frontline hero throughout this onslaught of COVID-19 pandemic. She's an artist and a community activist who has taken up the campaign of distributing face masks in underserved areas in New York City. However, while giving away free masks on August 10, 2021, Potri was assaulted in the E-Train subway. Potri is here to tell us her story. Hello, Potri.
Hi.
Hi, Potri. Kumusta? It's good to see you.
Mabuti naman. Am I on camera? Hi.
Potri? Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
But we can hear you loud and clear.
My camera is off.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Potri. Kumusta?
Assalamualaikum.
Assalamualaikum.
I just have an iftar today because it's today is the 14th day of Ramadan. I'm gonna get. So
thank you for joining us now. I mean, we do appreciate your coming on board to share your story. Can you please narrate to us what happened last year when this really deplorable incident happened to you?
Yes, it's actually very deplorable and very ridiculous by the fact that we're still in the height of COVID, and ever since COVID came in as a frontliner, we know very well that PPE is the number one prevention of the spread of COVID-19. That is before the vaccine. In fact, even there's a vaccine, I still encourage the world to wear masks because we're not still sure of the mutations.
Right.
Now, what happened in August 10, 2021 is that we are already going. I was coming from work. I work in NYCDOH, New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. I'm a public health nurse. And it is already a habit for me to bring masks in my bag wherever I go, and I distribute masks, and especially in the subway. And when I was at the E-Train at 34th Street, a couple with a child in a stroller came in without mask. And I'm really very happy to give the mask for free. And the man said, like, what? Yes, I said, this is free mask so that the COVID will not go to 2025. I said, he grabbed the mask and threw it on my face and said, mind your own business, chink. And he repeated that, like, mind your own business, chink. He approached me to grab the shopping bag where he saw I took the mask. The masks are individually kept in an envelope. So somebody grabbed him from his back. It's the woman now who stood up and start punching my head, saying Asian slurs, go home to China, or dirty country, mind your own business, chink. And then I was trying to feel her punch, and I said, maybe I can take this, because I was already planning which fatal area of her body I'm going to to kick,
So what exactly did the onlookers do? Were there people around you?
I was crying for help, but people did not really mind. There's no rescue, not even a word like stop it. There's no
No,
holler.
no police were monitoring that area at that time. No
No, Times
NYPD.
Times Square, there are police, but there's no police in the subway. I'm inside the subway car. I was being assaulted while the train is in transit, is running.
Mhm.
So I'm about to kick her knee, but when I look at the left side, she in fact cuts my left cheek, left eye. I saw this child in a stroller looking at her mom committing violence. So I said, if I break her knee, who will take care of this child?
Well, I was just because we are actually here to talk about misinformation, and you're telling us that they don't want the mask. So, anything else about that conduct that tells you that they
Well,
are, misinformed?
the thing is that since COVID came in, there's a lot of conspiracy theory that, oh, if you wear mask, the more you will have COVID. If you wear mask, there's so much conspiracy that even the president of US during the time really said that COVID-19 was a Chinese
Yeah, in
virus, and
your
the
line of
Congo
work.
virus. Yeah.
Yeah, in your line of work, when you're at work, do you encounter patients who refuse treatment or who still think that COVID can be dealt with without masks or vaccination?
Well, if patient is in the hospital, there's no more
Mhm.
choice. They cannot refuse anymore because
Mhm.
they can't even breathe. You know, that means they're really in a critical condition when they reach the hospital. This
Right.
might be the people also who refuse to wear PPE in their homes,
Mhm.
so that's why they get infected. It's other people that I know that they don't wear mask. There are even some nurse that in New Jersey is who really refuse wearing mask because wearing mask is a control. Like if you're wearing mask, you are like a prisoner. You're under control. Like you know. So those are informations that is dangerous because especially when another healthcare worker saying that people would believe and create their own theory about the disease. It's a pandemic. The
Right.
only way to heal the pandemic is also a community approach. It can't be one person exempted from wearing masks because that person will become the colony of the virus. That's one. And
So,
number two, they will just die. Like I have precious friends who died
oh, yeah.
from COVID. So this misinformation is fatal because that's another virus. If there is
Yeah.
that's the parallel pandemic. There's an
Hi,
existing
Potri.
pandemic that's very fatal. The misinformation is the parallel of that virus that created
Uh,
a lot of complications and you know.
yeah, Potri. What's the latest? What's the latest update from the New York Police Department regarding your case?
Well, the New York Police Department. I'm so sad. That's another sad thing because when I was assaulted, I pressed the button for emergency, and when I went up Times Square, there's a lot of police, but not one of them interviewed me. Not one of them took my statement. They took the statement of some bystander who said that, oh, that is just an argument over a mask. That's already a sign. Argument over a mask. During the time, there are already anti-masker demonstration. There's demonstration against vaccine right in front of the Department of Health. I even doubt that those people who assaulted me are anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers. Surely they are misinformed people. Now, if you, what is sad is,
Were they arrested, Potri?
no, there was
No?
no arrest. No, they
So
could
were
not.
you able to file a complaint?
This is the story. I have pro bono lawyers who attended my case, and then they cannot get my complaint. They cannot get a copy of my complaint unless they're going to file a FOIL, and it took 3 4 months to wait to get that complaint. I mean, the complaint, a copy of complaint was given to me. I said, these are not the words. These are not my words. And it did not even capture the hate slurs that was used against me. So, so as of now, my case is just called robbery, when in fact it is a clear hate crime, and
Mhm.
the trigger in fact is wearing a mask. It's a public health. It's a public
Yeah.
health issue, you know. So, well,
So,
and
Potri,
misinformation create a very bad effect on our mental health. Yes, sorry.
can you share with us any community activity that you're involved in right now that addresses anti-Asian hate? Can you just give us a
Yeah.
brief idea what you're working on right now?
So we just had a rally 2 weeks ago in front of Foley Square, and we have other survivors who went and speak, because what is coming out is, do not ask us what we need, and don't tell us what we need. Ask us what we want to happen. For me, there should be as examination of the existing. I mean, examine the existing hate crime law. Is it really for the victims, or it creates more? It encourages more.
Mhm.
It encourages more the assaulter, the assailant. That,
Right.
like, it's okay, and nobody. If it cannot be proven that I said anti-Asian slur, they cannot indict me with that case. So that is so subjective, because in my case, I was the one who already said that this is what said to me, but still it was not taken in the statement, in the complaints. Why? Because there's no, the law don't give a trust, not trust, believe, be the victim to be the witness of what
Right.
happened to them. And so
Right.
that's number one, because you see, no one can assault a bus driver or a train conductor, because there is a sign, an assault against bus driver
Right.
are punishable by law. So
Mhm.
if you
Yeah.
can
Right.
say an assault to a nurse is punishable by law, it's not even seen in the hospital. We are assaulted so many times.
True. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. I think so. Potri, thank you so much for sharing with us that incident. We wish you luck in your future endeavors to fight anti-Asian hate, and thank you so much for coming forward to tell us your story about this incident and for carrying on your activism against anti-Asian hate. So, Noel, let's move. Let's figure out how is this misinformation affecting our Filipino communities who are already the subject of anti-Asian attacks. So let's um, bring in our expert on misinformation, Noel.
Okay. First of all, maraming salamat, Potri, for sharing your experience. And hopefully, uh, the Filipino community and the Asian American community would join hand in hand in combating this rising and continuing to rise anti-Asian hate. Ngayon pong gabi, pag-uusapan natin ang lumalalang issue ng disinformation o fake news. Bakit kanyo? Because we Filipinos are heavy users of social media. Out of the roughly 109 total population of the Philippines, 73 million po are active social media users. Facebook is the most widely used platform. 96% of these internet users use Facebook, followed by YouTube with 95%, Facebook Messenger with 89%, Instagram with 64%, and Twitter with 56%. So, nandoon po tayo, lumalangoy po tayo sa social media na napapaligiran ng disinformation, misinformation, fake news at kung ano-anong attempts ng mga influence peddlers na maapektuhan ang ating
Mhm.
pag-iisip at ang ating pagkilos. So ngayong gabi, kasama po natin si Dr. Jonathan Corpus Ong. Professor Jonathan Corpus Ong will give us the lay of the digital land and help us navigate our way to truth and transparency. He is an associate professor of global digital media at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. At siya rin po ay research fellow at the Shorenstein Center in Harvard Kennedy School. He has researched extensively on global media ethics and digital politics. His pioneering study on shadow economies of political trolling shaped the social media and campaign finance rules for the 2019 Philippine elections. So welcome, Professor Ong.
Welcome, Professor On.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Professor Ong, uh, anti-Asian hate continues
Mm-mm.
unabated. We
Yeah.
understand you have conducted research on
Mhm.
how misinformation has led to anti-Asian attacks. Would you please share your findings with us?
Yeah. I can't help but feel moved, disturbed, affected by Potri's story. I think her experience, yeah, is so powerful, but also one among many, diba? I think
Mhm.
parang if you look at, and there's many statistics around anti-Asian assault, and depende dun sa grupo how they define hate crime or assault. But if we look at the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, anti-Asian hate crimes increased by 339% from 2020 to 2021. So, ang laking pagbabago nun. Of course, cities like New York and San Francisco, Los Angeles, yung hotspots for anti-Asian assault. And I think we can reflect on various reasons why that could be. It's important to also note na itong Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism also still underlines na Black Americans are still also the most targeted group when it comes to hate crime. So I think parang importante that we really try to approach the issue of hate crime from a perspective of like racial solidarity and how can communities work together to have an open conversation. But yeah, it was very powerful and disturbing yung story ni Miss Potri. And I know we have an immigration attorney here, right? Like, what would be the best way for people to do that reporting? Parang when they talk to the police, what needs to be written in that initial report? That's
Right.
what stood out to me. Parang dun
Yes.
sa story niya, yeah.
Yeah, most probably this is something that um, speaks to what are the legal requirements for that incident to be labeled a hate crime. There has to be some overt utterance. There's a overt act that suggests this action was brought about by um, internal, some racial bias or form of prejudice to a particular ethnic group. Um, what's surprising to us in this case is not so much the fact that it was instigated by um, how pottery is. Some attacks were brought about simply because of the way people look. But in this case, it was brought about by the notion of the attacker that um, personal freedoms have been invaded because Potri was offering face mask, and face masks has been a very controversial aspect of our public health crisis today, and
Mm.
which is why I think we should look into how misinformation has dug so deep into our psyche
Mm-mm.
that people act on it the way they do.
Yeah. And I do think, attorney, that here we're really seeing a convergence of latent or even like very overt racist perceptions and beliefs, 'di ba, about Asian people. So racist stereotypes of the perpetual foreigner, 'di ba? Na parang we are seen na we never really belong, 'di ba? Parang yung ordinary expression of the perpetual foreigner stereotype is where are you really from? Yung parang when we say, "Oh, I live in Boston." Parang hindi ka pa papaniwalaan. No, no, no. Where are you really from?
Really from.
'Di ba?
Yes.
So that parang foreigner stereotype, and we heard that in Potri's narration na parang sinabi, 'di ba,
Go
parang
back.
go back where you came from. So
Exactly.
yeah, but and also yung parang generalization na parang um if you recall, in the early days of COVID, of course, parang China virus being one of those key terms na nakita nating nag-trend siya talaga on Twitter. At
Right.
the same time, President Trump had said China virus as well. Right wing media like Fox News was also amplifying China virus. But for um, for for people who hold racist beliefs, they won't distinguish between a
Right.
Chinese or a Chinese American or a Filipino, Filipino-American, Korean. We're all just foreigners in their eyes. And therefore parang nagsasama na doon yung other kinds of stereotypes as well, that Asian people are vectors of disease,
Yeah.
that is crystallized in on the term of yellow peril, na parang it's an 19th century stereotype that associate working class Chinese people with disease and dirt. So parang
Right.
na-resurrect din yun. But of course, naghalo-halo na other kind of medical misinformation, health misinformation as to paano ba, sino ba nagke-carry ng virus. Pero sangay-sangay siya talaga na racism, when amplified by misinformation, leads to assault, leads to physical harm and attacks.
Okay, Dr. Ang, na-mention mo misinformation. Was there a conscious effort na misinform ang mga tao, disinformation regarding COVID-19?
I think merong intentional, merong hindi intentional.
Mhm.
So if you recall in the early days of the virus,
Mhm.
and yun yung distinction between misinformation tsaka
Right.
disinformation. Yung misinformation, yung parang kuro-kuro, ito yung mga rumors, ito yung mga folk cures na
Mm.
sinabi kasi ni tita, kumain tayo ng banana. 'Di ba
Mm.
parang ano yun, immunity against the disease. Narinig ko yun from my mom na narinig niya sa Viber groups, for example.
Mm.
So, 'di ba parang misinformation, rumors na nagso-circulate, parang marami tayong mga pamahiin din, 'di ba?
Mm. Right.
Tayong mga Pilipino as to ano yung mga right foods to eat, ganyan, etc. Pero disinformation naman kung may grupo na may intentional desire sila na mag-mislead. Usually for political objectives. Usually also to promote a certain candidate or a political party. And that's why we identify far right communities, 'di ba?
Right.
Na they want to blame China, or they want to they see the pandemic as a pandemic na parang may overlord
Yeah.
elites who are
Yeah.
behind it, 'di ba? And they're profiting from the vaccine. Parang yun yung mga disinformation that we can trace to some far right communities.
Wow.
Okay, so
So
with regards to disinformation in the Philippines, how prevalent is it? Gaano kalala ang disinformation ngayon sa atin sa Pilipinas?
Wow. So we're talking about the elections na, 'di ba? So it's happening in 3 weeks. And alam mo, Noel, parang ang feeling kong impact ng disinformation natin sa Pilipinas ngayon is parang as a result of many influencers, fake news pages, mga political trolls online, and of course, our politicians na, of course, mahilig din sila um, sa various misleading statements na nanggagaling directly from them, 'di ba? So, I am left with a feeling that nothing seems to be making sense in these
mm.
elections. But when you talk to your colleagues and my own colleagues or students in the Philippines, parang people don't know what to believe anymore. 'Di ba? Even yung mga surveys, parang bawat panig may sariling survey, and parang they will choose to believe kung anong numbers gusto nila. So to me that's very new na this time around we're just confused na parang how come the surveys don't make sense, parang sino ba talaga papaniwalaan natin. Itong state of confusion, I think, is the real example and impact of fake news.
Wow. Yung sinabi nyo, picking up from that, Dr. Ong, no, John, confusion. Kung minsan meron akong naririnig sa mga grupo na parang they just throw their hands up and say, pare-pareho naman kayong nangdilinlang, pare-pareho naman kayong nagfa-fake news. Maybe a little bit more than the others yung iba. Kaya wala na ring naniniwala sa information na lumalabas, whether it comes from traditional media or social media. So parang nagkakaroon na ng jaded attitude yung mga tao. Ayaw na nilang pare-pareho lang naman kayo kasing hindi nagsasabi ng totoo. So it's confusing, but it also feels like people are becoming indifferent about the truth.
I think
Um,
so. And also they choose na lang yung influencer or yung personality na gusto nilang paniwalaan kahit may facts naman talaga, kahit 'di ba parang there's evidence that might you know frame the issue in a definitive way, pero just because they don't agree with it, or they don't feel that it's right for them, parang they will just choose to believe their own bubble, their own ecosystem, and stay in that. And parang in my work, ang description ko doon is ang impact ng 6 years under the Duterte presidency na 'di ba parang diretsahan yung attack sa Liberal Party, diretsahan ng attack sa mainstream media, is naging sobrang polarized na yung ating electorate. And also media and social media have become also polarized. And meron akong slides na that I wanted to show you folks, na gusto kong ipakita yung dalawang ecosystems. I think it's the next slide, Ricky. Yeah, so itong polarized media ecosystems, kumbaga, na nasa left yung parang the pro-Lenny camp, and ito yung kanilang favorite media channels, ito yung mga political personalities na tinitingalaan nila, ito
Mhm.
yung mga celebrities at influencers na tinitingalaan nila, ito din yung mga parody pages and meme pages na fina-follow nila. So for example, Rappler, si Rowena Guanzon, former COMELEC
Oh
commissioner,
yes, yes.
Angel Locsin, the LGBTQs promoting Lenny Robredo, such as the transgender influencer Mela Habijan. Tapos meron tayong parody page, Malacanang Events and Catering page, na if you can see, parang 'di ba, they're poking fun na hindi hindi daw gwapo si Sandro Marcos. So parang may ecosystem, parang if you believe in Lenny, you can choose to just follow this ecosystem. But if you choose to support Marcos and Duterte, meron ka ding media channels. SMNI, owned by Pastor Kiboloy, of course, charged by FBI mismo, 'di ba? He's facing FBI charges. Manila Times, which is very favorable to Marcos. Bobby Tiglao, a political pundit, again favorable to Marcos, spreading misinformation there about Ukraine. Tapos, yeah, you have influencers such as Senora Santibanez, Jam Magno, tapos itong mga TikTokers. So, kung saang panig mo gusto, parang, yeah, you can just stay in your bubble. And parang may fandom element also to social media these days, 'di ba?
Right. So I noticed also, Dr. Ong, that these posts or these memes are emotionally charged. Uh, it seems to me na parang ini-encourage na magalit, ini-encourage na matakot, ini-encourage na mag-taunt, They're encouraging people to taunt each other. There's really a lot of emotional investment on the part of people consuming this content.
Mm.
How does that play into the spread of disinformation, and what kind of online harms will it bring us as a community?
Totoo 'yan. So parang ang term ko din diyan is, ang bawat campaign nakikisali na sila sa meme wars. And memes are very powerful because they are humorous. They sometimes take the form of satire or parody. Sometimes parang gutter language, and 'di ba parang the language of the streets. Um, sometimes very hateful directly. Sometimes naman medyo pa-funny siya. And parang it is through memes kung paano nag-a-attack yung kanya-kanyang partido, 'di ba? And I also find it, for example, very interesting and funny. The Marcos campaign, for example, si Bongbong Marcos mismo, ayaw niyang mag-criticize daw, 'di ba? When it comes to debates, he doesn't want to criticize his other candidates. Pero that's because he has a whole ecosystem online na nagsiseed naman ng mga memes against
Right.
Vice President Lenny, 'di ba? So you can see an example here. So yeah, just some examples. No? So ang memes yung pag-attack ng mga iba't ibang candidates. So for example, kay Manny Pacquiao, may conspiracies na the only reason na tumatakbo siya ng presidency is because he lost a lot of crypto investments. Tapos marami ding memes that poke fun at his broken English. Si VP Lenny naman yung attack sa kanya in online spaces, yung mga terms na tawag sa kanya, lutang ina. So
Oh,
obviously like a
mm,
play on that on that very
yeah, the
negative
cuss
phrase.
word, yeah.
Oo, on that cuss word. Tapos she's also being called Len Len by Amy Marcos in her YouTube page. Yung insult sa kanya is parang bobo or puppet daw siya.
Mm,
'Di ba? So, and then pero si Bongbong Marcos and his family, sometimes ina-attack din sila, and I
mhm,
need to mention na sometimes it can be quite homophobic and transphobic, some of those terms. So for example, itong meme na nandito, itong post poking fun at Bongbong Marcos' son Sandro Marcos na yung physical appearance daw niya has a resemblance to transgender celebrity Jake Zyrus. Of
mm,
course, 'di ba, hindi na Charis, and
uh,
that's why we need to call this out as well as
right.
homophobic and
It has to be
transphobic.
called out.
Mm.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah. Go ahead, Noel.
Dr. Ong, you did the research of the 2016 election in the Philippines. Can you tell us similarity or difference between your 2016 research of the
Mm,
your research of the 2016 election and what's happening now in
mm.
this coming election? Is there a difference when it comes to the troll operations?
Yes. So ang difference now is yung pera napunta na sa social media. So nung 2016, we can say na most of the spends are sa TV, 'di ba? Parang sa mainstream media pa din, sa political ads. TV, radio, print, grassroots mobilization. So parang ngayon, social media mas central na sa mga campaigns. Dahil in many ways, yung hype, di ba, na parang Duterte won because of social media, yun yung mga kuro-kuro. And I don't believe na purely because of social media, just to be clear. But people now say na they all have to play the social media game, all have to play the meme wars nowadays. So, mas nag-expand ang architecture sa social media. Dumami na din ang mga platforms. Dati, Facebook, Twitter. Meron na din sa YouTube. Definitely ngayon, TikTok, YouTube, Viber groups, private messaging groups, mas kumalat na din doon.
With regards to these platforms na nabanggit mo,
Mm-mm.
meron bang ginagawa itong mga platforms na to
Mm-mm.
to
Sure.
combat, the spread of fake news or yung mga
Mm-mm.
trolls?
I also wanted to add to the other question that I think it's super interesting. So the 2022 election, iba din siya dahil dahil hindi tumatakbo si Rodrigo Duterte.
Mm.
And Duterte himself was a real game changer, 'di ba? Parang from his own mouth lumalabas yung the most shocking, remember, 'di ba, parang he was cussing the Pope. He was cussing Pope Francis, he was cussing
It's like a
Barack
meal
Obama.
factory, Dr. O.
Exactly. So siya mismo yung nag-normalize nung attack. Siya mismo nag-normalize yung pagmumura, 'di ba? And therefore, yung tenor, yung tone nung campaign nung 2016 talagang balahura, 'di ba? It comes from him. And therefore yung fans niya kinokopya lang siya. So in
Right.
2022 may pagka-disconnect na parang especially in the Marcos campaign, from himself, very positive, very, 'di
Yeah.
ba, parang toxic
Unity.
positivity.
Mm-mm.
Oo, parang very toxic positivity na puro unity na lang. Ayaw ayaw sagutin yung mga allegations around graft and corruption,
Right,
around
right.
taxes.
Mhm.
Pero yung attack naman kini-carry out nung mga trolls na part ng kampanya niya, and yung mga meme wars, 'di ba? So yun yung quite different this time around. Personally, as a researcher, I don't think that the Marcos campaign is very creative. So parang when people ask me, so what is the new artful
Right.
disinformation for 2022? You've uncovered how the Duterte campaign had done so many innovations. Parang ang sagot ko, actually, the creativity this time around is the organic movement in VP Lenny's campaign, na parang it's using love and empathy and humor. They're balancing grassroots, 'di ba? Parang talking to different people sa barangay level. So I think that's quite unique. There's social media volunteerism, na parang lawyers for Lenny, teachers for Lenny. I think that's unique and very creative. And I think we need to also credit that. And the Marcos campaign, I find it like really dull. The fact that he doesn't show up on in debates, diba? And he doesn't answer questions. He plays it so safe, like in his official appearances, and he allows, yeah, his sister, Amy Marcos, and troll armies to do the dirty work for him.
All right. He wants to stay above the fray. So I was just wondering, John, I came across an interaction between you and one of the campaign strategists, Alan Herman, and he mentioned something about the new way campaign strategists deploy their forces in the campaign these days. Hindi na uso ngayon ang troll, mas micro-targeting na ngayon ang ginagawa, meaning people are actually, the disinformation is being seeded in smaller groups in social media circles. Can you please explain that a little bit more? I mean, if
Mm-mm.
that's really the case right now.
Mm-mm. Sure. So yung phenomenon of micro-targeting talks about how kailangan very localized and very niche yung messaging ng campaign. So parang kailangan mong ibenta yung kandidato mo to different kinds of communities, na parang whether it be, the housewives, also like the Beckies, for example. I always have to mention yung mga Beckies for Lenny, di ba? I find it like really creative and cute. So parang you want to make sure na yung message ng kandidato, yung personality ng kandidato, will resonate with specific communities. And yun naman talaga ang power ng social media. Ginagawa ito sa pag-hire. So binabayaran talaga mga micro-influencers. So, 'di ba yung mga mega influencers, ito yung mga celebrity status na ng mga 1 million followers na sila on Facebook. 'Di ba yung parang kilalang-kilala na silang mga vlogger, 'di ba yung mga Mocha Uson, yung mga parang they talk to like a huge group. Ngayon, micro influencers, so parang lower level people, pero they look more real, they look more organic, 'di ba? Parang they're innocent and funny. So, and that's powerful in itself, na parang, oh, I trust this person kahit 10,000 followers lang siya. Pero they're part of my community and therefore I trust them.
Right.
So ngayon yung campaigns, what they do is they hire like dozens and dozens of micro influencers, as opposed to just pay like one big Angel Locsin, for example. Of course,
Right.
parang celebrities are still important, but now micro influencers are also important.
Is that why social media gets the lion's bigger share now of the campaign budget?
Yeah,
Now that you
so
have to deploy more micro influencers?
oo, so yeah, talagang ano siya, open season among micro-influencers na naghahanap ng mga kandidato. Yeah, they some of them mga meme accounts lang siya, mga parody accounts, and satirical accounts, pero nagpo-promote siya ng mga candidates. So, ang palagi kong example, and nagugulat ako na hindi pa rin siya, hindi pa rin siya binabantayan, si Senyora on Facebook. So, if you recall, parang Senyora Santibanez is a fictional TV character na para siyang very bitchy, fictional tita in some TV show. Parang is a Mexican telenovela ata. Tapos, parang palagi lang siyang may binabanatan. Tapos, marami siyang mga kandidatong pinopromote on her page. So to me, the question there is, anong ginagawa ng COMELEC? Parang binabantayan ba? Parang that's obviously a paid ad. Diba? But this is an influencer collaboration. Paano yun kina-count?
Right.
Uh, Dr. Dr. Ong, may question tayo from the audience, although hindi siya election related.
Mm-mm.
Uh, Besides elections, ano pa raw venues or outlets kung saan lumalaro ang misinformation or disinformation, like mga global issues such as,
Mm.
let's say, climate change or yung sa Ukraine. So paano lumalaro dito ang misinformation and disinformation?
Sure. I actually wrote an article for the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, PCIJ, and my investigation looked at um, Duterte accounts, pro Duterte and pro Marcos accounts on social media, including TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, that spread misinformation about the Russia Ukraine conflict. So, interestingly enough, nung sinugod ng Russia ang Ukraine, itong mga accounts on TikTok, on Twitter, um, many of these accounts, nandun sa about page nila, hashtag BBM Sara 2022. So kaya ko sila alam na pro Marcos Duterte. So, ang narrative nitong mga accounts na 'to is, um, uh, Duterte was right for the Philippines to ally with Putin and China rather than the US. So they were saying na it was correct that Duterte does that, and therefore we need also to elect someone who will continue this foreign policy. Tapos another sangay nung conspiracy narrative nila is VP Lenny is an USA controlled puppet. And therefore by electing VP Lenny, Philippines will come closer to war. So talagang sobrang nakakagulat itong misinformation and conspiracy na to. It's also nakaka-depress dahil parang bakit naman tayo nakikisaw-saw pa sa Russia-Ukraine conflict? Parang i-promote niyo na lang yung kandidato niyo, wag niyo nang isama naman ang 'di ba, the people of Ukraine are suffering. Let's not hijack an international conflict, an international tragedy to score political points for your candidate. And it was so depressing to write about. But
Yes.
yeah, I had published this article for PCIJ.
Thank you. Wow. So, Dr. Og, Filipinos are scattered all over the world, 200 countries and territories, and we depend a lot on social media to maintain connections with friends and families back home. Does the fact that Filipinos are the biggest migrant community predispose us to consume or spread fake news or misinformation because we just jump right into social media because we need connection, we crave it?
Yeah, that's such a good question, 'di ba? Yeah, I think parang with our overseas workers, yeah, and for us, yeah, and myself as a professor, I also lived in the UK before coming to the US. And therefore ang dami ko ng experience talking to different Filipino migrants from different backgrounds. Ang kulang talaga for Filipinos in the diaspora, for Filipino migrants, is where do we turn to for information? Where do we who do we consult if we're experiencing a crisis? yeah, such as the very powerful story that Miss Potri had shared with us, 'di ba? Parang sino yung dapat i-consult natin pag may nangyaring crisis, 'di ba? Whether it's a personal attack on us or there's a world crisis, whether pandemic or a political issue. And kulang tayo ng relevant media sources. Kulang and it's great that you have PinoyLife here that is really catering to Filipino-Americans, and you're providing relevant news and information to them. Pero yun talaga yung common. And that's why hanap-hanap na lang tayo kung saan-saan. Hanap tayo ng influencer, hanap tayo ng alternative healer, hanap tayo ng, 'di ba, ng kung sinong tita, 'di ba, narinig natin sa office ay Fox News ang palaging nasa office. So sige, yun na lang. Parang because there's no definitive source of information, I think that's where we're susceptible and vulnerable to misinfo. At the same time, and I need to make this critique as well, is yung legitimate mainstream media sources of information will never really center the experiences of us as Filipino Americans.
Right.
'Di ba? Parang it was great that the recent Grammys had awarded, 'di ba, and recognized Filipino American talent. But in reality, Filipino Americans are invisible from most media here. And therefore, meron talagang pinaghuhugutan tayo na we can't really kind of trust mainstream media because they never really told our stories properly. So parang feeling ko kailangan din natin yung i-push na kailangan journalists should be listening to our stories. We should be engaging the newspapers and reputable outlets to allow us to tell our own stories too.
Siguro yung sinabi ni Dr. Ong, mas matindi ang siguro ang pakiramdam ng mga Filipinos na nasa labas ng US. So, definitely, mas maliit ang impluensya nila, mas maliit ang visibility nila. Pero ang tanong ko is, paano ba kumakalat ang disinformation? Anong mga sectors ng Philippine population nagmumula ang mga so-called fake news? I mean, witting or unwitting spreaders of fake
Mm.
news.
Yeah, and that's such a good question, Noel. Ano, parang saan ba nanggagaling? Sino ba yung dapat nating ini-educate when it comes to fake news and disinformation? And of course, as a teacher, and ikaw, kayo, sir, teacher din kayo, di ba parang sometimes parang nakakasakit din parang when I hear people say especially in the Philippines na hindi kasi natuturuan ng bata ngayon ang kabataan ngayon ng tama, 'di ba? Parang gano'n na it's the fault of the elementary school teachers, of the high school history teachers na hindi daw naturuan ng kabataan ng martial law era. I'm not too I'm sure we need more research about that na parang ano nga bang tinuturo ngayon. But at the same time, I would say that misinformation comes in various forms and they spread in unexpected circles. So they're not always, coming from the masa.
Right.
Parang the discourse of the bobotante, I think it's very dangerous na parang yung mga masa kasi hindi marunong magbasa or nagbabasa lang sila ng headline sa kanilang phone and
Phone.
therefore hindi nila binabasa yung article. Kailangan natin silang turuan. I think that's very patronizing. I think the masa and poor people are very rational and practical voters. They will vote for something that will yield benefits, material benefits to them. And who are we to judge that? Um, in my own study, 'di ba, parang I study the hierarchy of disinformation. Sino ba yung nagsa-strategize ng disinformation? Parang yes, when we talk about the troll, sila yung lower level anonymous account operators, nababayaran sila maybe 15,000 a month, usually from a working class background. Pero I say tinatawag natin silang troll. But what about the campaign strategist at the top? Yun yung head troll.
Mhm.
That person is wealthy. That person comes from the upper middle class. They have political and business interests. They're never called a troll. And I think that's quite classist, and we need to challenge that na, the PR firms, the PR agencies at the top, mayayaman to mga to, sila nagde-design ng campaign. And I think we need to hold them into account rather than itong parang, ay, si Mocha Uson and yung mga fans niya, mga bobo sila. I think that's very dangerous.
So yung mga nasa tuktok, merong hindi yan basta mga troll army lang. Merong nag-ooperate niyan. There's a puppet master, so to speak. So how do we who should we hold accountable and how do we do that? I mean, you cannot in the interest of respecting freedom of expression, you cannot have government control what comes out of these people's mouths or whatever is posted on Facebook. So, who should be held accountable, Dr. Ong? Should it be the government? Should it be the Facebook? Should it
Mhm.
be the content creators or yung mga nagbabasa, yung content consumers?
Yeah, so I think all of the above, attorney, ang sagot ko po. Yeah. So lahat po tayo may responsibilidad, lahat po tayo accountable to what we share, to what we post. I mean, even on Facebook, 'di ba? Parang we're responsible for what we share. So parang sometimes parang madali tayong mas sweep ng emotions na parang, oh, there's like a headline na very aggravating, very negative. Paminsan gusto natin i-share just because parang na-sweep up tayo ng emotions of the event. But do we really want to do that to spread more negativity? 'Di ba? Rather than more understanding. So I think at that level we have a responsibility. But yung argument, of course, platforms, as Noel had asked earlier, they need to be doing so much more in terms of content moderation, in terms of policy making, in terms of supporting new research and civil society interventions. May responsibilidad din sila when it comes to itong troll farms and troll and strategists. Ang argument ko palagi is medyo um, ang ating efforts and energies are a bit misguided because we continue trying to unmask the low level troll. We continue trying to shame the low level account operator, some of them from very economically precarious situations anyway. But we have yet to really develop language and legislation that targets the chief architects, that targets the chief strategists. So isang example lang na ibibigay ko sa inyo, there was a recent legislation passed by the Senate and signed by the Congress, the SIM Card Registration Act. And yung
Oh,
framing ng issue na ito is bawal na ng may anonymous accounts, and government will now have more control to unmask anonymous account operators online. And to me, it is a very narrow interpretation of troll. It defines the troll as the anonymous operator. It doesn't define the troll as the designer of the campaign, right? And I think that is the person to be held accountable. And to be honest, the politicians who are authoring these, they're also kind of scared of the strategists, aren't they? Because
yeah.
these are the people who helped elect them. Journalists are also kind of scared to name them out because these people hold advertising money that will also place ads in their programs.
Yeah.
So we are in a difficult situation here. And so, attorney, baka kayo may suggestion din.
Hawak tayo sa leeg ng mga campaign strategists, ganun ba?
I think so. Hindi po ba?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I guess yeah.
Dr. siguro, last question. Actually, we would like to leave our audience with some tips like
Mm-mm.
how do
Yes.
we detect, how do we detect if the information we come across with on social media is fake? Are there red flags?
Mm-mm.
And is there you've answered earlier that some steps we can do to reduce it, if not totally stop. But what are the red flags so that our viewers will not be unknowing spreaders of fake news?
Yeah, so parang to me I'm a quite spiritual person, and it is Holy Week anyway. So maybe I can be a bit spiritual with you. I really trust my intuition. How does this headline and this article make me feel? If I'm feeling a state of fear and anxiety, then that is a red flag for me. If also an article has a hero versus villain frame, that is also a red flag for me. Parang if the article is saying na parang, oh, this is the big villain and I have the answer how to expose this person. Parang yung good versus evil, I'm very, very wary of that kind of framing in an article or an advocacy. I'm also wary of posts, articles, and people who punch down. Yung parang they're in a position of power, pero they're gonna target someone lower than them. Parang I think we need to be parang punching up, holding political elites, those in power into account rather than going for the small fish. We need to aim for the bigger fish. So parang to me, intuitively yun yung mga signs. Of course, in technical terms, if you want to check yung background nung account mismo, 'di ba? Na parang marami ba silang followers, may mga numero ba dun sa account name nila, 'di ba? Yung parang Jonathan Ong 12345. Parang that sounds a little fake, 'di ba? So may mga ganun din. And at the same time, it's good to have a friend to also do social media checks for your account. I'm sure for journalists like you two, as academics like me, parang paminsan parang meron ding mga harassment campaigns against us. So, pag kunwari may balitang lalabas or may controversy or research article din akong ilalabas, parang meron din akong friend na will Google my name, 'di ba? Malay mo may harassment or other kind of meme, 'di ba, na mag-a-attack sa'yo. So parang and ayaw mo naman ma-traumatize na ikaw mismo makakita nung hate speech about you, 'di ba? So
Mhm.
and that's why you want to rely on a friend to also check, to do a health check of your social media.
Yes, that's an important tip. Health check with a friend on your social media account.
Mm.
Wow. So this has been. I think we barely scratched the surface, Doctor. Ang daming pag-uusapan. I mean, I hope one of these days we can invite you again to speak about what's going on around us in the field of social media. This is just so a very fertile field to discuss. Um, we all have a stake in the truth, so we need to do our best to reduce, if not stop, the spread of misinformation. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights, John.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
Okay, we'd like to thank our guests. Una si Potri Ranka, who shared with us her experience and then her perspective on what happened that day in the subway when she was attacked, and also to Professor Jonathan Corpus Ong, John, for the valuable insight he shared about misinformation and how the Filipino-American community can protect itself from it. Chris?
Mga kaibigan, no fear of missing out na. A recording of tonight's episode of Usapang Fil will be available on our PinoyLife website. So please go to www.pinoylife.net. You can also access our previous episodes of Talk of the Town and Usapang Fil. You can choose to listen to it also on podcast mode. Kung meron kayong paksang gustong pag-usapan, padalhan nyo kami ng email, info@pinoylife.net. Send those topic suggestions and we'll see what we can do. Pag-uusapan natin yan. So, hanggang dito na lang muna po tayo. Kita-kita tayo muli. Ito po ang Usapang Fil.
Salamat at ingat!